There's a fear that has settled deep inside Israel's military establishment, not the kind of fear that comes and goes with news cycles, but the slow, grinding kind that keeps generals awake at night and shapes every strategic decision a nation makes. It is a fear rooted not in speculation, but in cold, verifiable numbers. Numbers like 100, the number of ballistic missiles Iran is producing every single month. Numbers like 5,000, the projected size of Iran's missile arsenal by the end of 2027. And numbers like 550, the number of ballistic missiles Iran fired at Israel in just 12 days during the summer of 2025. When you sit with those figures long enough, the fear starts to make complete sense. To understand why Israel is so deeply alarmed, you have to go back to the beginning, not just to recent conflicts, but to the foundational logic of Iran's entire military doctrine. Iran does not have a modern air force. Its fighter jets are aging relics from the pre-revolutionary era, supplemented by some Russian and Chinese aircraft that have never been fully integrated into a coherent offensive strategy. Iran knows it cannot fight Israel or the United States in the sky on equal terms. So decades ago, Tehran made a deliberate strategic choice. It would build the most formidable land-based missile force in the Middle East, one so large, so diverse, and so deeply buried underground that no adversary could destroy it in a single strike, or even in a series of strikes. That decision, made quietly over many years, is now one of the defining security challenges of our time. The missile program Iran built did not happen overnight. It began during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, when Iranian cities were being bombarded and Tehran had almost no way to retaliate effectively at range. Iranian engineers reverse-engineered Soviet Scud missiles, learned from North Korean technicians, and began constructing the foundations of what would eventually become the most missile-heavy military in the entire region. Over the following decades, they systematically improved range, accuracy, payload, and critically, survivability. The goal was never just to build missiles. The goal was to build a deterrent so credible that any enemy thinking about attacking Iran would have to weigh the certainty of a massive retaliatory strike against any potential military gain. What Iran has built today is something that even the most experienced defense analysts describe with a kind of grudging respect. The arsenal spans multiple categories. At the shorter end, Iran has missiles like the Fateh 110 and the Zulfiqar, solid-fueled weapons that can hit targets within a few hundred kilometers with respectable accuracy. These are the weapons Iran has supplied in enormous quantities to Hezbollah in Lebanon and to the Houthis in Yemen, extending its missile reach far beyond its own borders without firing a single shot from Iranian soil. Then come the medium-range ballistic missiles, and this is where things become genuinely alarming for Israel. The Khaybar-Sheken, unveiled in 2022, is a solid-fueled missile with a range of approximately 450 kilometers. It is road mobile, meaning it can be moved quickly before being detected, reducing the window for a preemptive strike to near zero. It carries satellite-aided guidance and is equipped with a maneuverable warhead, making it harder to intercept. The Sejil is a two-stage solid-fueled missile with a range of around 2,000 kilometers, placing every inch of Israeli territory within its reach from deep inside Iran. The Khorramshahr 4, sometimes called the Khaybar, is a liquid-fueled heavyweight capable of carrying payloads estimated between 1,500 and 800 kilograms, heavy enough to carry cluster munitions that scatter over a wide area, complicating interception geometry entirely. And then there is the weapon Iran is most proud of, the one it has spent years marketing to the world as a game-changer, the Fateh. Iran unveiled the Fateh 1 in June 2023 with considerable fanfare, calling it the country's first hypersonic ballistic missile. The word hypersonic immediately drew enormous international attention because a truly hypersonic weapon, one that can travel at more than 5 times the speed of sound while maneuvering unpredictably, is one of the hardest things in the world to intercept. The United States, Russia, and China have spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to build and defend against such weapons. Iran's claim that it had developed one independently was met with a mixture of alarm and skepticism. The reality, as independent analysts have since explained, is more nuanced. The Fateh is not a classic hypersonic glide vehicle, and it is not a scramjet-powered cruise missile. What it actually is, according to Fabian Hinz, a research fellow for defense and military analysis at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, is a medium-range ballistic missile that incorporates a small rocket motor inside its re-entry vehicle, allowing it to maneuver during the final phase of its flight. This makes it a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, or MEA-RV, rather than a true hypersonic glide weapon. The distinction matters technically, but from a practical defensive standpoint, the impact is real. A missile that can change its trajectory in the terminal phase, when interceptors have the least time to react, is genuinely harder to shoot down. Iran had found an engineering path to anti-missile defense effects without needing to master the most demanding aspects of full hypersonic flight. In November 2023, Iran unveiled the Fatah 2, which reportedly adds the ability to maneuver in and out of the atmosphere. Whether that claim is fully accurate or partly aspirational, the direction of travel is unmistakable. What truly frightens Israeli military planners, though, is not any single missile type. It is the combination of quantity, production rate, and tactical sophistication. In closed-door sessions with the Knesset, Israel's parliament, senior military officials have delivered warnings that, by any measure, are extraordinary. They told lawmakers directly that Iran's accelerating production of ballistic missiles now represents a major strategic threat. They warned that without the disruption campaign carried out during Operation Rising Lion in June 2025, Iran's arsenal could have approached 8,000 missiles by the end of the decade. Even with that disruption, Israeli intelligence assessments project a stockpile of at least 5,000 missiles by 2027, and Iran is currently producing around 100 new ballistic missiles every month, with output expected to increase as production infrastructure is expanded and hardened against future strikes. To understand what those numbers mean in practice, consider what happened in June 2025. Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a massive preemptive campaign targeting Iran's nuclear sites, missile production facilities, and air defense networks. It was one of the most complex offensive military operations Israel had ever conducted, involving hundreds of aircraft, precision munitions, and coordinated cyber operations. Iran's response was Operation True Promise 3, the largest and most concentrated ballistic missile barrage in the history of warfare between these two countries. Over 12 days, Iran fired between 500 and 550 ballistic missiles at Israel. Israeli air defense systems, the multi-layered combination of Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow 2, and Arrow 3, backed by American THAAD batteries, worked around the clock to intercept them. The performance of these systems was impressive by any historical standard, but impressively good is not the same as perfectly sufficient. Israeli authorities confirmed that 31 missiles landed in populated areas or struck critical infrastructure. 29 Israelis were killed. Significant damage was inflicted on buildings and facilities across the country. For Israel, a country of roughly 10 million people packed into a geography smaller than New Jersey, every single missile that gets through matters enormously. The June 2025 conflict exposed something that defense analysts had theorized about for years, but had never seen tested at this scale, that even the most advanced layered missile defense system in the world has limits. It can be overwhelmed. It can be exhausted. And once the interceptor's stockpiles run low, replenishing them takes months or years, not days or weeks. This is the second dimension of Israel's fear, and in some ways it is even more alarming than Iran's production numbers. During the 12-day war, American missile defense assets, particularly THAAD interceptors, played an outsized role in protecting Israel. The United States had deployed THAAD batteries to the region specifically to supplement Israeli defenses, and those interceptors were expended in significant numbers. By the end of the conflict, U.S. stockpiles were described by analysts as significantly depleted. And here is the mathematical problem Israel now faces. Pentagon procurement plans call for the purchase of just 37 THAAD interceptors in 2026. 37. Iran fired more than 500 missiles in 12 days. Even accounting for the fact that not every missile requires a THAAD intercept, many are handled by lower-tier systems like Arrow and David Sling, the arithmetic of supply and demand is deeply unfavorable. Iran can build 100 missiles a month. The United States is buying 37 THAAD interceptors in an entire year. If another conflict breaks out before those stockpiles are rebuilt, Israel could find itself in a far more vulnerable position than it was in June 2025. This vulnerability is not hypothetical. By the time February 2026 arrived, intelligence reports were piling up, indicating that Iran had not only replenished much of what it lost during the 12-day war, but had made significant improvements to its remaining capabilities. Analysts estimated that Iran had rebuilt its stockpile to somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 missiles of various types. The country had resumed aggressive production, and in December 2025, Iranian media briefly reported, before state news quickly denied it, that Iran had conducted ballistic missile tests visible from multiple major cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, Mashhad, and several others. Whether those were test launches or operational exercises, the signal was clear. Iran was not retreating. It was reloading and improving. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched a new, even more extensive campaign of strikes against Iran. Officials described it as far more comprehensive than the 12-day war, with the IDF targeting not just missile launchers and nuclear sites, but Iran's entire defense industrial base. every facility along the production chain, from raw material processing to final assembly. Over 1,700 military-industrial assets were struck in the early weeks alone, with hundreds more on the target list. The stated goal was to systematically degrade Iran's capacity to build, store, and launch missiles, not just for the immediate term, but for the foreseeable future. Iran's response was again massive. Between late February and the ceasefire declaration on April 8th, Iran launched approximately 1,471 ballistic missiles, not only at Israel, but at American bases and at Arab Gulf states that Iran accused of facilitating the strikes against it. The UAE received 563 missiles. Kuwait received 265. Qatar was struck 215 times. Bahrain absorbed 194 missiles. Saudi Arabia was hit with 135. These were not random acts of desperation. They were calculated, strategic salvos designed to impose maximum cost on every country that Iran perceived as part of the coalition against it, to sow regional instability, and to demonstrate that Iran's missile force remained a functioning strategic weapon, even while its infrastructure was being pounded from the air. A conditional ceasefire was eventually declared on April 8th, with Pakistan mediating peace talks. But nobody in the region believes the underlying conflict is over. What makes this dynamic so uniquely terrifying for Israel is the nuclear dimension hovering over everything. Many of Iran's medium-range ballistic missiles, the Sejil, the Khorramshahr, the Imad, the Ghadr series, are inherently capable of carrying nuclear payloads, and this has been a source of deep international concern for decades. In September 2025, United Nations Security Council Resolution 1929 returned to effect, explicitly prohibiting Iran from any activity related to ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear weapons. Iran has defied that prohibition openly, continuing to develop and test systems that everyone understands could be adapted for nuclear delivery the moment Iran acquires a functional nuclear device. And in May 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that Iran had carried out undeclared nuclear activities at 3 previously unknown bases: Lavazan-Shian, Turksabad, and Veramin. The convergence of a growing missile arsenal with a nuclear program that continues to advance despite every diplomatic and military effort to contain it is what transforms Israel's concern from significant to existential. There is also a tactical innovation that emerged from the 2025 and 2026 conflicts that deserves particular attention: Iran's use of cluster munition warheads on ballistic missiles. Analysts confirmed during the June 2025 war that Iran had equipped at least some of its medium-range missiles with cluster warheads containing dozens of submunitions, each carrying around 2.5 kilograms of explosive. The logic is brutal and clever. A standard ballistic missile with a single large warhead is a single target for an interceptor. A ballistic missile that releases 24 or 80 individual bomblets at high altitude presents a completely different interception challenge. The submunitions disperse over a radius of several miles. No interceptor available today is designed to reliably defeat that kind of attack. It is a direct assault on the architecture of layered missile defense, and it worked. Human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, condemn the use of cluster munitions as indiscriminate because the bomblets do not aim for precise targets. They fall across whatever happens to be beneath them. The broader strategic picture that emerges from all of this is one of a contest between an attacker with near unlimited patience and expanding production capacity, and a defender with sophisticated but finite interception resources and a small, densely populated geography that offers very little margin for error. Iran has spent more than 40 years building this missile force. It has absorbed international sanctions, covert sabotage campaigns, targeted assassinations of its scientists, and now multiple rounds of direct military strikes. And every time, it has rebuilt. The ideology driving the program is not purely rational deterrence theory in the Western sense. It is deeply intertwined with the Islamic Republic's founding narratives, its conception of itself as a revolutionary power encircled by enemies, and its explicit long-term objective of removing what it calls the Zionist entity from the map of the Middle East. These are not negotiating positions. They are stated beliefs that the people running Iran's missile program genuinely hold. For Israel's strategists, this creates a problem with no clean solution. Preemptive strikes can slow Iran's program, but they cannot permanently destroy it, as the events of 2025 and 2026 have demonstrated conclusively. Diplomatic pressure has failed to produce a comprehensive deal limiting Iran's missile capabilities alongside its nuclear program. The February 2026 indirect negotiations, which the Omani foreign minister said had shown significant progress, collapsed when President Trump said he was not satisfied with the terms on offer. Even a military campaign explicitly targeting regime change, which the 2026 strikes were partly designed to achieve, has not produced a stable outcome, with Iran launching missiles at regional targets even while its cities were being struck. What Israel is left with is a grinding, open-ended competition in which it must intercept an ever-growing number of increasingly sophisticated missiles, while Iran simply has to keep building, keep hiding its launchers in tunnels and underground facilities, and keep firing. The arithmetic favors the offense. Missiles are cheaper to build than interceptors are to manufacture. Iran's monthly production rate outpaces the combined resupply capacity of Israel and its American partner. And while Iran's guidance systems, maneuvering re-entry vehicles, and cluster munition payloads grow more capable with each passing year, the fundamental physics of missile interception, the challenge of hitting a bullet with a bullet from below in seconds, does not get easier just because the technology improves. There's one final element that rarely gets enough attention in mainstream coverage of this conflict, and it speaks to the deepest level of Israel's anxiety. Iran has spent decades distributing its missile technology and hardware to proxy forces across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon is estimated to have possessed well over 100,000 rockets and missiles before the 2024 conflicts. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated the ability to strike targets in Israel with ballistic missiles and drones. Iraq-based militias aligned with Tehran have fired on American bases across the region. This is the logic of the so-called axis of resistance, a distributed missile network that can engage Israel simultaneously from multiple directions, forcing its defense systems to fight on multiple fronts at the same time. When you add the threat from Lebanon's north, Yemen's south, Iraq's east, and Iran's interior simultaneously, the arithmetic of interception becomes even more unfavorable. Israel's fear, then, is not irrational. It is the recognition of a structural problem that has been years in the making and that has no easy resolution in sight. A country that must intercept every missile correctly against an adversary that needs only a fraction of its salvos to get through faces an inherently asymmetric challenge. Iran has built a weapon, not of conquest in the conventional sense, but of exhaustion and saturation. And the painful truth that Israel's generals are wrestling with is that the most advanced missile defense architecture in the world, backed by the full support of the United States military, has not yet found a reliable answer to a country that simply produces missiles faster than they can be shot down. The conflict between Israel and Iran has entered a new phase, one defined not by infantry or air superiority, but by production rates and interceptor stockpiles. Iran knows this, and so does Israel. That is precisely why the fear is real, why it is deep, and why it is not going away.